What happened? All that, it's coming off. Get it off right now. Get it in, we'll get you warm.
Oh, no, I can't. You two, you got this. You're gonna have, you get warm. I can't be a part of this at all.
I'm taking my clothes off. Getting in there with you.
Well, you could die, that's your choice.
Oh, fine. Nick, turn the camera off. What's that smell?
Oh, that was me. Dutch oven.
All right, guys, so hypothermia. If you're like me, you know very little about it. You just know that you don't want to freeze to death. So we've got Mitch and Paul here. Between Paul being a former Navy Corpsman and Mitch being a SERE instructor, we figure we could give you guys a really good overall understanding of hypothermia, how to prevent it, what to look for when you're going into it, or your friends are going into it, or someone that you know is going into it, and then especially like how to treat it, what to do about it once someone's in that state. So if you're, this is probably gonna be a longer video. If you wanna skip based on chapters to find that specific information or stage that you're interested in, feel free to skip ahead, but we're just gonna hop right into it. The first question you probably have is, it's beautiful out here, it's 60, 70 degrees. Why are we talking about hypothermia in the fall? Well, what do you guys have to say about that?
Well, no one ever thinks about hypothermia until you're hypothermic. So we're getting into those kind of colder times of the year where, you know, it's talking about prevention, kind of the why, the how, the when, the what, all that stuff like that. So yeah, it's really important to get ahead of it, because if you don't get ahead of it, next thing you know, you're standing next to a tree going internal. Next thing you know, you black out and somebody finds you either by the tree or they don't find you. So it's all about the prevention.
They find you like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. You just wake
yeah,
up the
just
next morning.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, even then, like the majority of the times I've seen people go hypothermic, it's not in the winter.
Right.
It's in the fall and it's in the spring. Like, really? Because they don't think it's possible. And they go, no, it's been beautiful, it's been great. This is like t-shirt weather. Right. It's like, yeah, until it's not, and the wind hits and you've been sweating and now all of a sudden you can't maintain body temperature. So it's actually the most dangerous when you think it's impossible for you to go hypothermic.
Wow. Okay, so for all of us who have an infant level of understanding of medical and trauma and how the body works, what is hypothermia?
So yeah, so hypothermia is just your body's inability to maintain an internal temperature, okay, right? There's some different stages. Some things that we're going to talk about are the different stages. We're going to start off with talking about prevention. We'll get nerdy and do the whole physiological kind of response to that. And then we'll talk about treatment. But in essence, like Mitch said, no one ever thinks about it. You get like this kind of false sense of comfort within the cold that you don't have in the heat, because in the heat, you're always thirsty. You're just hot. And, you know, when you're cold, it's like, oh, I don't need to drink water. Oh, I don't need to eat right now. Oh, I just want to be warm and cozy and just kind of do my thing. And then next thing you know, something happens and you didn't plan properly, which leads to a poor outcome.
Gotcha. All right, so how do we prevent it?
So the number one thing is trying to keep your body at that perfect operating temperature of 98.6, right? It's better to have an ounce of prevention than a pound of treatment in order to try to get yourself back up to that temperature. So like the first thing that I try to talk to people about is, if you know the environment, you know the weather's coming, it's okay to put on some winter weight. Fat is a great insulator. I'm like not even kidding.
Yeah.
90% of people that end up going hypothermic don't have body fat.
Yeah.
So it's okay to eat some sugary snacks and goodies during the holiday season. You know, put a little bit in there and it'll help you stay a little bit warmer. Also, like the type of foods that you eat make a big difference. I try to stay away from higher protein diets during the fall and the early spring and winter, because the proteins are really good for building muscle, but your body consumes it differently, and you don't actually burn the fuel source in order to generate heat well. So higher carb diets, good fats, all those are actually going to allow your body to burn more efficiently in order to produce heat well.
And people don't plan properly with that. They kind of, you know, things like the wonderful nicotine, like, you know, the military diet, you know, caffeine, nicotine, and then protein bars, you know, that's not necessarily, there's going to come a limitation with that. So planning and nutrition is a really big deal with that, and that's kind of going to set you up for success.
So if you're like packing out, let's say you're preparing your vehicle, you've checked your tires before the winter comes, you've got a couple of extra blankets in there, the kind of, you know, we all have snacks and stuff in our vehicle, or like, you know, a jet boil or things like that. So it sounds like the types of food or snacks you may typically carry in your vehicle for wintertime, or for like just backpacking or something like that, it should probably change if you're planning on being cold.
Absolutely.
Like, what kind of snacks would we be like wanting to pack?
So I want to consume warm goods. So like some of the military diet things like MREs, overriding and not even cooking your MREs, bad idea. Because if you consume warm food, it'll heat you from the inside out, which is better for your body temperature as well. Going high density carbs like pastas, chilies, things like that, where you're like, oh, that's a good hearty fall meal or winter meal. Those are always going to be better in order to help you stay warmer for a longer period of time.
What about like ramen?
Ramen's great. It's a great pasta. It's cheap. You can have a crap ton of it all over, and the broth puts a lot of electrolytes back in your system as well, in order to stay hydrated for a longer period of time as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I mean, really just the easiest way is doing the REI thing with the heater meals and stuff like that. You go to the military surplus stores, get you some, if you really score, like look for the cold weather MREs. They're gonna be more caloric intensive, and they're gonna be set up for success to where you're not dealing with some of the things that you would deal with just your normal kind of regular MREs. And then of course, when you're planning for that, mission dictates, you know, how many people are you expecting in your car? You know, I have a pretty moderate sized family, so I try to pack things out for everybody. And then, you know, if you live in the Midwest and you might be stuck on an interstate for 24 to 72 hours, you kind of plan for that. If you're living here in Tennessee, we don't get a lot of snow, but there are a lot of back roads to where you may be 12 to 24 hours before someone finds you if you don't have cell service. So those kind of considerations with the food, we're going to talk about kit here and gear, and everybody loves that stuff. It's really important to kind of plus up, stage. And I always tell people, it's like the med stuff. Like, if you were in a really life or death situation, that $6,000 night vision that you just paid for, like, you tell me, well, I don't have money for a tourniquet, or I don't have money for any of this crap. If you're in that situation, you would cash every bit of that in right now for that stuff right there. So it's just, you know, prioritizing what you need to do and kind of making sure that you're doing things appropriate.
So obviously keeping your core temperature up, whether you're in hypothermia or you're trying to be proactive, you're gonna need some calories to be able to put into your system. With that in mind, you're gonna wanna consider a way to take food out in the field or have food in reserves at home if something bad does happen. My Patriot Supply is a sponsor of this video, so go ahead and go check them out. We've been using their products for years, and they are pretty tasty. So go to preparewithdc.com. Make sure that you have some food in reserves, both when you're out in the woods and maybe even when you're at home.
Yeah, let's talk about the clothing, right? And I'll come around this side real quick, but you know, starting from like basically the skivvies to the external layers here, okay? Good like kind of merino wool style socks with your wife's hair intertwined in it, because you know that's how that works, right? But no, yeah, the merino wool socks, we want a good, we used to have a term, comfortably cool. So I don't want to be warm, I don't want to be cold, I want to be comfortably cool enough, because if you're out in these environments, you're not typically just sitting by a campfire camping. You know, we're doing movement, we're being active, whether you're a hunter or just an outdoor enthusiast, or if you're in an emergency situation. So I want that kind of material. Underwear, you know, spend a little bit more money on the non-cotton stuff, like, you know, the kind of the moisture wicking, the kind of polypro style kind of underwear. Pro tip with this, it doesn't smell as bad either if you wear it for a prolonged period of time.
The other thing with those base layers like the merino wools, the polypropylene materials and everything else is making sure that it's moisture wicking. Because the idea is like eventually you're going to sweat. It's just human nature, it's going to happen. So when you do, you want to have that moisture pulled away from your body as much as you possibly can. So finding something that is designed to pull water and moisture away from all of your parts is going to do a lot in helping you stay warm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of have progression. So the military came up with a PCU kind of level, like the stuff that you kind of see if you really get nerdy on the levels 1 through 9, which is really interesting stuff to research. But like an individual named Mark Twite kind of came up with that. Worth a Google. He's one of those guys that was like a world champion, if you want to kind of put it that way, with mountaineering. And they kind of developed a protective clothing uniform to use in different environments. And you kind of get down to like the level 1s and level 2s where you're looking at kind of some of these long johns. So we got away from like the old thermal cotton long johns to these kind of moisture wicking mixture between the polypro to where you could even, I want to be able to layer. So I start with this, and then I might put this on over this if I'm static overnight, and I'm not moving as much. And then I can take it off. That's the cool thing about the cold is you only get so naked acceptably socially when it's hot outside. In the winter time or the cold, I can always add or subtract,
But there is a fine line there. So like you can overdo it with putting too many layers on, and there's a lot of guys that will wear every last piece of clothing that is on the table at the same time, and they're freezing their balls off. And it's because they have no circulation. They've put so many layers on that in essence they're restricting the blood flow, which is carrying heat to all their extremities. So you have to keep it loose while you're keeping it layered. Otherwise, you're just going to be cold and worthless anyways.
Yeah, I remember being a kid, like growing up hunting, I would put extra layers of socks on in my hunting boots. And it seemed like the more layers of socks I put on, the colder my feet were.
Your toes were always frozen.
They were always frozen. It was always miserable. I would and there wasn't even enough room to stick like heating pads. I just had to like lay heat on the outside of it. So but obviously I'm older now, and
it's poor circulation. I want to be able to move. I want to be able to have good circulation to where I'm preventing hypothermia, good homeostasis is going on, and I'm kind of maintaining that body temperature. This is probably my favorite layer. Like this style quarter zip right here, to where you get that real thin, you could kind of like see through it if you held your hand up to the light. I like to wear these typically under jackets and stuff like that, because even at its kind of base level layer, even with it being cold outside or acceptably cold outside, I'm pretty warm, right? Because it's not skin tight, but it's tight enough to where we're getting good temperature maintenance there, and then it's also moisture wicking. So like you're gonna sweat in your armpits, you're gonna sweat like in other areas, in the groin and stuff like that. So I need to be able to allow this to dry out pretty quickly.
So on base layers, are you wanting to, this is always hilarious. Anytime I buy base layers, I'm like, okay, well, I wear a medium or I wear a large, but I'm gonna order a small because I want it to be skin tight.
That's a good question.
Like, what should you do?
How tight is too tight, right? And all that is circulation. If you're seeing like when you're wearing it and it's like cutting off circulation and you move like the sleeve around and it's got the little rings that are digging in, it's too small.
Gotcha.
Has to be bigger. You have to have good circulation throughout the entire process.
Yeah, some of it's preference. Some guys like things a little bit tighter than others and stuff like that. Like for example, I'm typically an extra large, but then you get into a lot of these companies, you just never know. You still look at size charts and stuff like that. This is just another version of this. It's just a regular kind of crew neck kind of thing. Great for wearing underneath a t-shirt, right? Or wearing underneath a uniform item or a jacket, stuff like that. And then these kind of come in like I think this is like a level 2. Yeah, so really thin, pretty acceptable. Like if you're in like a really cold environment, like you could still be active in these and wear these under like a uniform. And kind of go from there. And then you get to, I think these are a level 3, the waffle style. So like these are kind of designed, as you can see, there's some insulation, that waffle kind of style design that helps maintain and insulate your body heat.
Gotcha.
These you will, I could never wear these underneath pants.
You get sweaty as hell.
It gets hot real
bad.
quick. And then even like the quarter zips, once again, these are great. But understand too, like this doesn't work if I wear a cotton t-shirt and then put this over it. So if I'm putting like a poor layer underneath this and then that gets wet, it's preventing me.
So the reason avoiding cotton, right, is cotton seeks out moisture and it retains it. It doesn't wick it away, it holds it in. So cotton's great for like summertime when you need to cool down. You're pretty much taking this concept and you're reversing it. I want to stay wet. I want the wind to come down and cool my body temperature off to prevent overheating. Here we want to reverse that entire concept. Okay, I need to get the water away from me as fast as possible, dry out as quickly as I can, and then keep the body heat circulating inside of this little biome I'm going to create for myself.
I've never heard it explained that way. Just reversing the process.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
smart.
Other than like most people buy this because it looks cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
and this is what I see the SF guys wear, right? So it's like, oh, I want to wear that, you know. But there is a reason behind all this stuff, and if you've ever been cold and you've gotten to wear this in a cold environment, you're like, man, this is like, imagine that, like, you know, this is everything's planned out, right? And then you get to like, I have never gotten to wear one of these in like extreme temperatures, these like the Velocity Systems Rugsby's, but I do like, I've worn them a lot within just the normal, you know, Tac Med LE application I do. These actually do a really good job as a good moisture wicking, and they dry out pretty quickly. I just kind of threw that in here. If you look at this, you got your kind of more extreme kind of waffle top, a little bit more insulated. It's got a little bit thicker material. Big fan of these. These are really great if you're just kind of, you know, like a day like tonight, like where we get kind of probably in the 40s, 50s. Really great if, you know, no shirt underneath it, just wearing this guy right here, you're gonna be very warm and cozy. Yeah, absolutely.
I would wear oftentimes just that out deer hunting.
Oh, 100%.
Like something like that.
And you're even seeing that now with like the Sitka brands. Like you're not seeing dudes go hunting like professional hunters in Carhartt. Like they're taking an athletic approach to making sure that they can stay out longer, they can go farther. And it's just, some people would say, oh, that's all creature comfort. Well, there's a lot of science back behind this too. So, and then it gets all the way to the jackets, right? So you get these really insulated, kind of lightweight, puffy kind of jackets. I like these a lot. They breathe really well. I try to look for jackets that have good ventilation through them. So like this one right here doesn't have the armpits, but it does have kind of openings to where I can kind of allow body heat to escape. And I like that a lot. We talked about the Primaloft, you know, that's what I'm kind of looking for, is that kind of lofty, good insulated material that not only moisture wicks, but it does insulate, but it also doesn't get to the point to where I am overheating myself.
The other one that you'll see used a lot is down. Or storm down, which is just a treated synthetic down so that it doesn't retain water, because like the feathers of the down duck and everything, when it gets wet, it absorbs it and it's like, okay, well, this is worthless now. So it's used as like a mid layer. So if you come down into anything when it comes to the layering system, you need a base layer that pulls the water away from your body. You need a warming layer that helps circulate your body heat and insulate it. And then you need a shell layer in order to prevent the environment from getting in or blowing all of the heat out of you that you were trying to trap inside of it. So like you can do all of this same sort of stuff from Walmart for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
It will cost you like $20 with a raincoat, just a fuzzy sweater, and a moisture wicking shirt.
Yeah.
We should go to Walmart and do that.
Same thing.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
It'd be fine.
Or
do a
Goodwill.
overnight experience.
Dude, you could absolutely do that.
Ooh, that's cold. That's cold. Thanks, Josh. You know what else rhymes with cold? Gold. Allegiance Gold, big thanks to those dudes. They make videos like this possible. Right now, if you go to protectwithdc.com, you can earn up to $5,000. You can earn up to $5,000 worth of silver on qualifying purchases. Allegiance Gold is one of the best rated gold companies in the game. So if you're looking to diversify your assets and get away from the USD, you should check them out. Protectwithdc.com. Oh, that's gold!
Yeah, and the things that you don't see on this table that are good additions is like the Gore-Tex. So if you're in an environment like the Washington area, or out in the mountains where you're expecting a lot of moisture, rain. If you're static, the Gore-Tex is great. If it's raining outside, Gore-Tex is fantastic water repellent. It's not great if you're actually doing long-term movements, because it retains a lot of heat. You will go hypothermic if you're wearing all this in a Gore-Tex. Like, you're gonna get hot real quick. And then of course the wind chill kind of garments. I think they're like the level 7s, I think the level 5, level 6s that they call, that have the wind blocking kind of the real trash bag style materials. Those are really good. And it goes back to the planning thing, is ounces equal pounds, pounds equal pain. And I know people are like, oh, yeah, I've heard that before, but it is true. Like, when you're packing things out, like when I was active duty, didn't bring deodorant, didn't bring the stuff that I necessarily, like, I'm gonna bring the hygienic stuff that could kill me if I'm not hygienic, but I'm not bringing like a lot of extra crap. So, I do want it light, I want it functional, and I want to make sure that, 1 is none and 2 is 1.
Gotcha.
And then we're going to talk about how to use some of this stuff and the considerations associated with it, but then of course the prevention. And it's ranging anywhere from keeping your hands warm, right? So, like, very low cost situation here, some people will call these creature comforts, but if it gives you any sort of mental edge, like, why not pack it? Yeah. Cabela's, right? You're gonna look for companies like 3M that have that thinsulation style. Like, it's a waterproof kind of duck layer on the outside that you can wax up to keep kind of longer, and then the inside's all insulated. So those are great for your hands, Yeah. Yeah, it even has a pouch in there. Yeah, that you can actually put warmers in there. Wow. And then once these warmers die, like once it's kind of microwaved itself in there, it stays pretty warm for a pretty prolonged period of time.
Oh yeah.
And then, some of the treatment stuff that we're going to talk about later, you got anywhere from the survival blankets to the more heavy duty survival blankets that actually have insulation bubbles in them. And then the Mac Daddy of them all, this HPMK, which is actually a combination of active and passive rewarming. So, and then of course, if you're thinking about the self-rescue things, stuff to have as pull-less litters or however you're going to rescue a loved one, is something just to think about with kind of considerations on that. But everyone loves gear. When you're making those gear considerations, making sure it's functional, making sure that it's realistic within your mission, and just making sure that everything is has its place.
One of the other things that you'll see a lot in like the spring and the fall time when this is happening is it's not snowing. So keeping all this just dry is also just as important, because if you need to put dry clothes on, which is usually one of the solutions, if all of your stuff is wet, then you're kind of screwed. So having like a good dry bag, or packing an emergency set of clothes inside of a trash bag and tie it up real tight, or vacuum seal it or whatever, just always having that inside of a bag with you, whether it's in your car, inside of your like backpack when you're out in the mountains hunting, whatever it is, having that set up so like, oh crap, this is really bad. You can just rip that thing open, take off your wet stuff, put it over there, grab this nice dry stuff and put it on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to ask about that because, I've been out hiking before, and like after a rain, it was a clear day, it was after a rain, saw a creek that I'd seen many times before, and I was like, oh yeah, I can just like step right there. I've got waterproof boots on, no big deal, and just, take 2 steps in the creek and cross. First step, drop down to my, it just eroded a hole out of it, and I was up to my waist in it, and all of a sudden, freezing cold. So that's another side of preventative stuff that I know it's easy to forget about. So just having the extra clothes and a dry
Just
bag.
have an extra set.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we'll talk about the physiological response to that, and then kind of what the effects you're going to see through that. And the mental piece plays a pretty big game in that. So like, I can't tell you how many times you just get the sigh of relief of like taking off wet socks, even if your boots are wet, and putting on dry socks, dry underwear. Like dry socks and dry underwear.
Change your life.
And then change your life. Then you put your cold camis over it. You're like, well, at least my groin and my feet are warm. Like, all right, I'm back in it for at least another 12 hours, So stuff like that is huge. And if you can plan for that, and you can have all this stuff in whatever system you plan, it's a big game changer.
Mitch, how would, like, let's say I get my feet all wet, which actually happens quite often. I have an extra pair of socks, but my shoes are still wet, so it's just a matter of time before my dry socks are now wet again. What are you doing to dry out your socks? Are you just air drying it? Like,
So I'll take the socks, and as I'm walking around, one of the warmest places on your body is your groin. Yep. So like hiking around, you just take the toes of the socks, shove them right down in your pants, right into your groin. These are your socks, Paul, so you're welcome. And you just walk around, and your body heat will actively dry that off for you. And as long as your body's working, it's generating more heat. So especially if I need to keep moving and I've already changed my socks, I'm like, okay, wet ones are going right here, and I'm gonna keep moving, keeping my body temperature up, keep myself working and active as I am drying those off as I'm moving. So you could wear dry your items as well.
Gotcha. Cool. Sweet. All right, so these are some of the things that we can do to prevent. What are we actually looking for though? Like I've never seen someone go into hypothermia,
Okay.
so I don't know. All I've seen is on movies and TV shows, people freezing to death.
I mean, do you want to?
Huh? Well, it'd be nice to know. It's like, what are we dealing with here? Like where, are we at the point where it's beyond the point of return? Like, is it too late? Like, what am I looking for?
Hypothermia is a serious thing, but you know, no one with a flamethrower ever died of hypothermia. So if you guys are interested, you can check out Exothermic. Don't die from hypothermia. You can use the discount code ACC20. That'll save you 20% off any accessories if you're ever purchasing a flamethrower. Again, that's ACC20, save 20% off accessories if you're getting a flamethrower from Exothermic. Don't die from hypothermia.
So yeah, so some bigger things with the physiological kind of responses and what you're looking through for the different stages. So in a way, hypothermia can turn into a type of shock, right? Everybody dies of shock. We've talked about that last time with some of the hemorrhagic stuff, right? So when we're looking at hypothermia, if you've ever been outside for a prolonged period of time, whether you're playing sports, hunting, whatever you do for fun, we've all kind of experienced the cold fingers, cold feet, and the shivering, right? So Mitch had explained earlier about like we want our body temp at 98.6. So when we start getting below 98, that first stage of shock is, you know, around below 98, anywhere from like the 95s to breaching the 90s. Which shockingly, like if you were walking around with a thermometer inside of you all the time, like if you're in the mountains and whatnot, you're probably going to be pretty cold quite often. And the body is actually extremely resilient, especially if I can continue my caloric intake, I can continue to drink fluids, and I'm staying active, right? So if I can do that, I can flirt with disaster a little bit. It's once we go internal, once we get into these types of responses of the body's response of the hypothermia, and then we don't do anything about it, that's where we get dangerous. So
What do you mean by going internal?
So let's talk about going internal. We used to see it a lot, specifically with training or in real life scenarios where mentally, so we'll bring up the mountain warfare stuff because that's always a gut check. Once you get in the mountains and you get cold and wet and you're busting your butt over rocks and traversing side, like it's a world of pain, right? You get to a point to where I'm wet, I'm cold, I don't feel like drinking, I don't feel like eating. And then you see your buddy over there that you were talking right now, you're shivering, and I go do something, I come back, and now I see you, you know, in the fetal position, not the fetal position, but the squatting position, knees to the chest, arms around your knees, and you're just kind of got that thousand meter stare. That's internal, right? You've basically given up on the attempts to do what you need to do to stay in the game. You're checking out. And those are the people that we see that do not do very well in these environments.
Is that just a mental game, or like what?
Some of it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mental fortitude that can play into it, but it's also part of the body's physiological response to the cold. It's trying to shut things down to try to keep your core warm, because it's going, you know what? I don't need to do this, I don't need to do that, we don't have the energy for it, we don't have the calories or the fuel in order to burn to do those stuff. What do I have the capability of doing right now? We're gonna sit here.
And it goes back to same thing with the hemorrhagic shock, right? Shunting. So when you go hypothermic, you get vasoconstriction, right? My body doesn't care about my arms, legs, and my head necessarily. It cares about my heart and everything in the core. So when I start getting vasoconstriction, I start losing, the ability to, one, make good decision making because I'm not perfusing correctly in my head. I can't use my hands as much because I'm cold, and I maybe get some, we talk about third spacing, right? So we get a edema because we're constricting, but then fluid is being pulled from areas that we need it in.
What's third spacing and edema?
So what we're talking about is when we get to these later stages of hypothermia, so let's backtrack back to the first stage is the shivering, right? We get to shivering, we get the kind of the teeth chattering shivering, not just like, ooh, like I'm a little cold.
The uncontrollable, where it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great example right there. That's what we see. That's the beginning stages. Once we get to the second stage, that's where we get to anything below around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where we get decreased cognitive functions, right? That's where we start to get people not making good decisions because we're not perfusing properly. We're burning, that shivering burns calories. So I'm burning through things that I need, fuel, food is fuel, and I'm burning through that fuel. So I'm heading towards E really quickly, or it depends on your environment. And then when that second stage, we see the shivering maybe slow down, and maybe we see some edema. So we see the swelling of the hands or some of the extremities due to third spacing where fluid is leaving the parts we need it to and going into like basically the middle space between your muscles and your fatty tissue and stuff like that. That's typically bad, right?
Can I ask you a question on that? So anytime it's like super cold outside, especially if I'm like shooting or something, I feel if my hands feel like tighter than normal. Is that like, at what point do you decide, oh, I'm just cold, or oh, these are beginning stages of hypothermia?
It's big boy rules, right? So planning goes a long, long way, right? Just like Mitch said in the beginning. The military is great. It's like, you will not wear gloves. You will not put your hands in your pocket. You will suffer through it and acclimate to it, right? Yeah. Well, guess what? Like, what did you have guys do then? I took my hands, I shoved them between my plate carrier and my body, and I keep it warm. So I'm just constantly trying to comfortably cool. So I try to take those breaks to rewarm myself, and I would put my hands literally like down my pants, right? Just to get that circulation back, right? Stuff like that goes a very long way, very long way. So like once we get to that second stage, that's where we start we have to get aggressive in the treatment, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. If we don't get aggressive in that treatment, that's where, whether it's all the things that we'll talk about here in a little bit with the treatment, it's the things that your mom and dad taught you to do, keep it warm. But that third stage is right where we get to the decreased level of consciousness. That's where the shivering is stopped. We're getting into some very, very dangerous internal temperatures, below the 85s and the low 80s, to where you're maybe only responsive to like verbal communication or painful communication or painful stimuli. That's where we get into these real teetering line with the irreversible. And in this environment, if we haven't done the steps to change that or to fix that, when we deal with these hypothermic patients, they're very fragile. They run the risk of going into what we call ventricular fibrillation. So your heart basically turns into this kind of, like we talked about in the CPR video, where all that electrical activity isn't firing properly. And when that happens, you go into cardiac arrest, right? Which is a part of that. And then in this environment, once we start something, whether it's the rewarming or the treatment or the CPR piece of it, we're kind of dedicated to it, and we can't stop it once we start it. So it's very important that the prevention, to be able to recognize it at the early stages, to take a break, if we can take a break, warm up, either remove you from the environment or start going through the process to get you maybe some caloric intake, and even if it's just get your mental headspace right, and doing stuff like that.
Gotcha. Awesome. So, all right, treating it. let's say like you're already in either stage 1 or stage 2, stage 3, kind of talked about like what to look for to figure out where someone's at.
Yeah.
How do you actually fix them?
Well, you got to recognize it first, right? Of course, which we just talked about. The biggest thing to do is remove them from the environment.
Yeah.
Like, I remember as a kid, you maybe go sledding all day. You get back to the house, you take a warm shower, and it hurts. You know, that's like almost like your beginning stages of frostbite, right? But I was able to self-rescue or self-evacuate myself from the environment. So that's always that's the easy answer. It's like, you know, if it hurts, don't do that, right? If you're cold and you're going hypothermic, then get out of the environment. The parts where you get in trouble is where you don't plan properly and you're out in the wilderness, and now it's not as easy as just getting in my truck and turning the heater on. Now it's like, oh crap, we are miles or hours away. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And there's decision makings with that where are we going to stay and play, or are we going to try to get you out of there as quickly as possible? But remember, these people can become very fragile in the mild is not so fragile, moderate, we're getting pretty dangerous. And in the severe, when you're severely hypothermic, you are extremely fragile. So
fragile in what way?
So we'll start with the mild.
Okay.
Mild hypothermia, everything your mom and dad taught you to do, right, or your grandma. Warm fluids, taking off the wet clothes, replace them with warm clothes. Most people will respond tremendously to that, and it will fix probably a very high percentage of these problems.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would see it, he'd probably see even more from the instructor point of view with his experience where, you know, it's, you get that probably student that's cold, you're moving from the environment, here buddy, here's a warm cup of coffee. And you get your little heater in there and it's like, I go back, I'm good.
Yeah. So it's one of those things like you want to get them dry, you want to get them out of the cold, out of the wind, because you have those different versions of losing body temperature heat through conduction, convection, and evaporation. Radiating it out, right? So the big thing is to like eliminate that as much as possible, and then start supplementing it from warming them from the inside out, because that's the best way to heat up the body, right? The active warming and rubbing and all that sort of stuff, it only does so good. You get more bang for your buck by consuming hot food and warm liquids.
Yeah, so that mild stage of hypothermia, pretty easy fix, honestly. Where we get into it though is like, well, Paul, what if I am on a elk hunt, or well, what if I'm backpacking and it's not as simple as me just getting out of the environment, you know? Well, we have to do things to get you out of the environment, and Mitch does a fantastic job doing that with education on, you know, shelters and fire and stuff like that. But like, let's say we get to the mild going into the moderate phase. To remove people from the environments, we use blankets like this, right? So there's a difference between active and passive rewarming. Passive rewarming is there's no kind of thermogenics going on, right? There's no physical contact. It's just I'm removing you from the environment, right? This blanket alone, by just putting you in this thing, that's passive, right? I'm just trying to take you out of the environment. You know, it's windy out today. If you jumped in that water right now and you came out and we're in the shade and it's windy, you'd probably get pretty cold, right? You're a lean guy, so you'd probably get pretty cold pretty quickly. We might get away with just this passive rewarming. You know, just taking off your wet clothes, putting you in this, maybe giving you a room temperature or warm liquid, you'd probably be good to go. So that's kind of a consideration with that.
Oh my, it's already warm.
It's like 80 degrees in there.
Yeah. Holy crap. It's very warm already.
I know.
So look at the heat. Look how the heat is actually inflating this like a balloon.
Yeah.
That's
So-
keeping it off of my body,
Yeah.
and it's creating a hot air pocket for me to literally just grab this thing on the corners.
So Mitch, what do you say though? Like, because people are going to probably ask, like, is it safe to breathe this stuff in within an enclosed space?
No, not an enclosed.
So-
So this is one of those things. What it is doing is it's still using oxygen to burn. Anytime you have any fire source, you need ventilation.
Yes.
because if you don't, you are burning off all your oxygen and you will suffocate yourself.
So we had people like this is kind of like a very light way to do this. Get in a tent. Oh, we'll stay warm.
Yeah.
There's no vent
So
source.
the other way of doing it is instead of like capping your head off, keeping your head out and just wrap it around. Dude, this is getting really like if you stick your hand in right where my neck is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can already feel
It's
it.
probably 90 degrees.
Yeah, it's 90 plus degrees in here already.
All right, let me get in there. Let me feel this.
Don't catch on fire.
Batman your way around it.
Dude, even just like this.
So the wind is blocked. So you know this is like one of those things where you can get yourself back mentally capable to get to go and do what you need to do.
Oh yeah, man. Half an hour?
Well, think
30
about
minutes of that
time
burn
though.
time.
Like so, let's say if you start sweating and then you take that off,
Yep.
Then
and then it puts you back in this cycle of like kind of crap. Now I'm going back hypothermia.
So this is just to get you dry
Yeah.
and warm, but not to sweat. And the nice thing is that you can take that cap and you can cap it off and you can keep using that sterno can later on if you needed to.
Oh, that's nice.
Comfortably cool. Not hot, not cold, comfortably cool. When we get to the heavier stuff, right, the more, you know, this has insulation kind of, I guess, bubbles, if you want to call them, to where when it inflates a little bit, it helps with those laws of thermogenics, right? So now we got convection, you know, we got all that stuff going on with inside, like, you know, I think of these as like ovens, right? We have a little bit of active, not a lot, right? But let's say we took this and added some of these. Well, then we got some pretty good active rewarming.
Now you're cooking.
Now, exactly, right? Now, and the question's always that, like, well, where do I put these, right? You do have to be careful with like hand warmers and these hypothermic patients. Depending on what kind of hand warmers, you can burn people. You can get like first, second degree burns.
Wow.
Now these ones not so bad, but like, you can get some pretty heavy duty ones, like the
The ones for boots,
Yes.
I would not recommend because they're designed to be inside of the boot and then have a thick wool sock as a protective layer. So they get really hot. But like those ones that are made for your hands to be in your pocket in direct skin contact, they're great.
Yeah, so like best thing to do honestly is if you could take them out of the wet clothes, put warm like underwear and a like one of these like thin layers on, that'd be fantastic. Because we want a barrier between these applications here, these applicators right here. Groin, right? Armpits, groin, back of the neck, right? Or even just center chest. It just feels, you know, it just feels good. It's going to help rewarm the core, right? We're thinking about the core. Once we warm the core up, we're able to kind of stimulate, get things back to that homeostasis and get things back kind of just spreading the love across the body, if you will, right?
What about like covering your head? Because I've always heard that like a lot of the heat escapes out of your head or your feet or something like that.
So it can depend. So you know, the studies vary. You know, when I got taught, all my stuff is like 40 to 60% of your heat leaves your head. Well, then they did some more studies. They're like, well, actually, it's only like 10 or 15%. The moral of that story is like we do want to kind of, if you're bald, like let's put a hat on you. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it's got to be a dry hat, you know? And in this environment, in the cooler environments, people usually have beanie covers and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like if you can't cover someone's head, it's not the end of the world. But I'm going to be honest with you, that mental game changer there, like putting a warm cover, like, man, I used to love wearing our fleece caps. Fleece caps in the cold, like, because you didn't always get to wear them because it's uniform on it, right? Yeah. It's creature comfort. So like when you got to put that on, your ears get nice and warm, and it is a mental game changer for sure. So absolutely. And then of course, you know, you get the Mac Daddy here, which will demonstrate the HPMK, which is basically a very heavy duty, multiple layers of insulation. And it goes into an actual rewarming kit in here. Very, it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit more dense. This would not be like a first line kind of item, unless you just really were going at some pretty dangerous stuff, but it is heavy, right? It is, I don't know the weight on it, but it is pretty significant. And if I'm going on a long distance kind of movement, not something I really want to carry unless I'm expecting some bad things to happen. But once again, it has this kind of waterproof extra tarp layer that protects you from the environment itself. I wouldn't recommend just going, you still want a layer here, but this isn't necessarily meant to sleep in, right? This is meant to do a rescue. Once we get towards gaining momentum, we're doing the rescue piece. So it does have that. That's why it is more rigid too, to give a little bit more forgiving with movement. As you can see, it has the Velcro, so I can really seal you in here, right? So we'll kind of skip the first piece we did. Drew, you want to hop up in there?
Right. So you're gonna scoot up so your head gets in the hood.
So this is made for your typical, I think the height is over 6 foot, right? So if you got a real tall guy, they're gonna be sticking out of this thing a little bit. But you know, basically you just kind of Velcro it all together, just like so. Right, once again, right, we are completely packaged. He is ready to go. You look like a Pop-Tart. You look like an old Pop-Tart you find underneath like the trash can or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. Maybe like a strawberry or something. Yeah. But you know, this is, people ask about this. This is just so you put patient information on the outside. But this is a really good system. This right here, right now, is still passive, right? If you look on the inside, underneath Drew, you don't have to get up. You see all this white stuff? It's just more barrier. There's multiple layers to this, which is almost like a poly. I don't really know what that is.
I don't either, but it's the kind of stuff that they have in like hospital beds and stuff like that. So
if it does get wet, it doesn't necessarily absorb it. It takes a long time to absorb, but it's kind of easier to kind of keep you drier, kind of keep you warmer. This also comes with a giant heated blanket, right? And this thing is military proof. It'll tell you this side towards body, because if you do the other side, you can burn them, right? The older versions used to have like a slip that you'd slip it in, and then basically there'd be a barrier between the heaters and the person, right? So
And this is air activated.
so yeah, as soon as you start opening this up, just like a hand warmer, right? The material in here starts to warm up. As you can kind of feel the pellets.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're like the pellets, and then there's little mechanisms in here that initiates it. This is a really good opportunity, or a really good kind of option if you're thinking about really sustaining. I don't know the time that this kind of that lasts. I think it's roughly 45 minutes to an hour. The considerations with this would be like, I do want to establish a baseline temperature. Would you guess how we do that in the medical world?
Up the butt.
Yeah, it'd be rectally. I would like to establish a baseline temperature to see kind of where we start and where we get to.
All right, well, let's demonstrate.
Let's go ahead and demonstrate it. With that being said, though, like I don't want to open and close this. So, like in the medical world, we would have basically a line that would be shoved up there, kept, and then it would be coming out of the side of this, or it'd stick right here to where we don't have to open and close this thing. But we want to, it's kind of like smoking meat or barbecuing. Like I want to get that good temp in here. And
he wants that good internal temperature on the meat, you know, just to make sure it's getting cooked right.
So that's kind of what I'm going for. Once again, though, there is a timeline associated with this because the heaters are going to go away. And if you're not doing the caloric intake and we're not kind of stabilizing you to keep you kind of going through those methods, I mean, there is kind of one of those things where this is not the end all be all. So it's just, this is one thing that we got to get to the next step. So it's all one problem at a time. But with all that being said, we kind of, with the treatment piece, we do have to make a decision. Are we going to stay and play? Or are we going to self-rescue? Mild to moderate, you got that little bit of time, space, specifically if they're making good decisions and they're mobile. We got a little bit of opportunities to self-rescue. Once we get into that severe hypothermia, that's that fragile patient we talked about, to where if I start jostling and moving you and you're not really, you're not awake 100% of the time, you're only awake to where I'm, you know, shaking you or moving you, that's where we can cause ventricular fibrillation. That's where we can cause a lot of adverse events, we'll put it that way, right? So that would be 100% one of those things where we go into crisis mode. We're going to be trying to start fires. We're going to be removing you from your wet clothing. we may be doing some skin-on-skin rewarm, some active rewarming. Me and you gonna get in a bag. I'm gonna get either face to. It's basically the way we did it is face to face, right? I'm gonna hug you, and I'm not jostling you, but I'm actively rewarming your core, right, to get you to back to the temperature we need you to. Which is, I'll be honest, I've seen it done. I've always been in the wonderful position to basically tell people to do it. Like, it's like, hey, you private, like, Lance Corporal, like, you gotta get in that bag and rewarm with that dude. And he's like, what? But Marines are always like, yes. It's like, it's almost like a challenge, right? Just like, I'm gonna make you now, like, you went down, you're out of the game, so now I'm gonna make you feel uncomfortable. It's just like,
It's a pride
yeah,
thing.
it is. It's
funny.
definitely a pride thing, but it does work. But once we start this, we cannot stop it. It's not, never and always doesn't exist. It's not wise to stop it. So once we start this, we have to really understand that, like, we are really going on that kind of fine line of really kind of pegging ourselves in a location.
Gotcha.
So that goes into some of the things that he teaches with wilderness survival, is like signaling and how we're going to get rescued and all that stuff. And that's probably, I would say, what would you say, the worst case scenario at that point?
Yeah, I mean, like, at that point, you have to have a shelter built.
Yeah.
You have to have a fire going. You have to have a recovery area that you can deem like accessible by any air asset that might be coming by. And then you have to coordinate all of that, build everything. And it's a long, extensive process. Or you have to find a way of moving them to a good location for all of that, which is even worse.
So would you treat and then move, or do you want to try and move and then treat?
I think, again, yeah, just like you were saying, because like if I can move them, they're probably at that recovered point to where they can move themselves. And then we're ready to keep moving, but we don't want to stay in that environment, right?
Let's say the severe hypothermia stuff, these people typically aren't going to get turned around with me getting in a sleeping bag with you, and then you're just going to hop out of that sleeping bag like, I'm good, man.
That's going to be my question.
So we're looking at that severe state of, like, I have to figure out how to nurse you back to normal. That could be, intravenous fluids, right? That could be, if you can't, I've seen it before where people get to this decreased phase and it's like, you got to eat or drink. And now I'm shoving food and water down your throat, but you can't swallow right. Well, then you vomit and you aspirate. So, like, there's so many risks associated with that severe phase where it's like, even if I do stay and play and I get put into a corner where it's like, I got to get you, like, it's either this or you're going to die. Yeah. But once we get to that phase, like, if I don't have the ability to turn you mentally around to have your own caloric intake again, I'm looking at doing things medically from an IV standpoint, which most people don't have. And even if I am a medical person, I don't carry a lot of, like, this isn't sustainment, like, this is to stabilize
Like, how many
you.
bags of IVs do you have with you?
And then that's always the question, is like, well, how much is enough? And you're looking at, let's say just the average adult for stabilization with this, with like the 5% dextrose stuff, you're looking at 500 mLs to 1,000 or a liter, right? Man, that goes, that depending on the person, like, there's a period of time in there where that's going to stabilize you. But I also can't just continue that cycle, because then I don't have a way to really measure, your blood work and stuff like that. So it's like one problem at a time, but it always comes back to the planning. Like, if you're going out and about in these places and you don't have a plan to self-rescue or get rescued to you, and you find yourself in this situation,
You've already jacked up a lot.
yes, 100%. And you can set up the Hilton, but eventually the Hilton's gonna run out of supplies. And if I don't have a way to get out of there, then we're really flirting with disaster.
What's the most common way that you, in your guys' experience, what's the most common way or situations that you see people getting hypothermia in? Like, what comes to my mind is always these news reports of, huge snowstorm rolls through, people get stranded on the highway for 2 days, and then people find them dead. Yeah. And it's like, that's always what comes to my mind, not so much like people just randomly going out and getting hypothermia. Well,
mobility is survivability, right? So you get into that situation where you become static, and there's no way of you getting food or water, and your gas runs out, and now you don't have a heater, you know, maybe we start figuring out who we're going to eat first, you know what I'm saying? But
Donner party.
that's Samuel Jackson in that movie where it's like, we ate one person.
Yeah.
Typically the thicker person, right? So no, I'm just kidding. No, a lot of it is the wet stuff, right?
Yeah.
You plan for something, you fall in water, it's cool enough to where, you know, you get hypothermic really quickly. I don't know the timeline. They used to tell us, like, we used to have to go into the water, experience hypothermia, and I would say from my own personal experience, seconds. And I'm talking just none of this on, just underwear, water that's 30 to 50 degrees, getting out to where you're already walking to the fire and you're already in that, like, oh my God, and your mineral,
You're seizing up, your joints aren't worked properly and all that. Like, it doesn't take long at all. No. And I've seen somebody go directly to that. They're unresponsive, eyes have rolled back to the back of their head, and they stopped shivering. Just,
yeah.
And it took them 4 minutes.
Yeah. It's quick, but yeah, typically the moisture situation, the getting wet, injuries. Your beautiful snowy day out, we're gonna go deep into the farm. Now I get a fracture and now I can't self-rescue, right? And now I have not only a traumatic injury, which is gonna play a big part in this because my mechanisms are compromised, and then we get hypothermic. So those kind of, it's always that stuff. And then you could always go into the big time outdoors person, like, you know, pick your poison, right? Yeah. You fall off, you know, a ridge, you wind up in the stream, now you got a broken arm and you got an injury, now you're wet, blah, 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 or you run out of food, you get lost. And then I'll be
even
honest,
just lacerations. Like, if you lose enough blood, you're not circulating that heat through your body anymore. And it can be 80-something degrees outside and you can still go hypothermic.
when you get injured, your body compensates. When your body compensates, you get irregularities and increase of heart rate, increase of respiratory rate, increase of caloric output, cardiac output, all that stuff happens. So you're already starting behind the ball on that. And then now we're gonna throw in the cold weather and the hypothermia. And we've learned with the triangle of death that hypothermia decreases your ability to sustain clots, create clots, and even the same thing with everything else. It slows everything down and it puts more of a demand on your body. So I've even seen it where the elderly doesn't plan for snow or ice, gets out of their car, slips and falls. Nobody knows, they find them the next morning and they're in a severe stage of hypothermia because they've been laying on a surface of ice and snow and they can't move, they got an injury, which is something we've probably all experienced in our early days of camping if no one taught you to put an iso mat on there. Summertime, sleeping in a sleeping bag, wake up 2-3 o'clock in the morning, covered in sweat, freezing my butt off because I'm like, why am I cold? It's July. Oh, because I'm in a big sleeping bag, I'm sweating, I'm fully clothed, and not only that, there's no barrier between me and the ground. It just sucked all the heat out of me. Gotcha. So there's things like that this is a very, we'll put it like all hazards kind of thing. It can go from anywhere to normal day-to-day life, kind of bad things happen to good people, to just, out there living your life, enjoying the great outdoors.
Gotcha. Wow. All right. So, plan well.
Yeah.
Where you're going, what the weather's going to be like over the next couple days, a way to communicate, right?
Yep. Yeah.
A way to, get rescued if you had to. Dry clothes, food and water.
Yep.
And potentially some things to warm you up.
Yeah, some rewarming, active or passive. Right, it just depends on how deep you want to get into it.
I would say something to cook with too, because the liquids are good, you need them, but if you're drinking cold liquids, you're lowering your body temperature still. Yeah. So you need to put in warm liquids specifically.
So don't eat snow.
It's tempting.
It is.
Snow cones are great, taking the little Mios in the snow and
Yeah.
Oh, it's awesome.
And melting snow is always one of those things it's so easy. It's almost like being in the ocean with salt water.
You'll take that much snow
That much.
and you'll get that much water out of it.
Sounds about right.
Next
It's
to
a
nothing.
lot of work to get such little kind of output out of, and it's just like, oh man, I'm in bad trouble. So
Guys,
Don't die from being cold. And also don't do a video where you try to induce hypothermia in yourself for demonstration purposes. If you have any questions about this kind of stuff, don't ask us. You can put it in the comments, but we're just going to screenshot it and send it to Paul and Mitch. Mitch, where can they find you?
So got Instagram. You can message us at Agonic, or for the website it's liveagonic.com. And then if you guys are looking for classes on stuff like this coming out in the future, you can check out BaerSolutionsLLC.com, and I'll also check Baer Solutions Instagram right there, doing that stuff.
Oh, you really took your time with that one, didn't you? You can find Paul at Doc Pollack on Instagram. We'll put all this stuff up in the bottom of the screen so you guys can see it. I'm really cold. I'm gonna get out. Don't die in the cold.
Yeah, sure you will.
Oh, my legs are freezing up.